Last month, I ended my talk on Narayana Iyer with a long reply by Bhagavan on the Guru's presence, his sanity. I am going to post the whole exchange here again because I plan to explore the ramifications of what Bhagavan said on that occasion in some detail. Once I've done that, I will return to the Narayana Iyer story and continue to read out the unpublished chapter on him that I prepared for the next edition of part 1 of The Power of the Presence. Here is the full dialogue again. One day when I was sitting by the side of Bhagavan, I felt so miserable that I put the following question to him. Is the sankalpa, wish or intention of the jnani not capable of warding off the destinies of the devotees? Bhagavan smiled and said, does the jnani have a sankalpa at all? The jiva mukta, liberated being, can have no sankalpas whatsoever. It is just impossible. Narayana Iyer is the man in white standing behind Bhagavan on Natanananda. And this is Narayana Iyer's response. I continued, then what is the fate of all of us who pray to you to have grace on us and save us? Will we not be benefited or saved by sitting in front of you or coming to you? What use is there for family men like me coming here to you? And this is how Bhagavan responded. Bhagavan turned graciously to me and said, just as a trouble or arrow that comes to destroy the head goes away carrying with it only the turban, so a person's bad karma will be considerably reduced while he is in the presence of a jnani. A jnani has no sankalpa, but his sanity, presence, is the most powerful force. He need not have sankalpa, but his presiding presence, the most powerful force, can do wonders, save souls, give peace of mind, even liberation to robbed souls. Bhagavan continued and concluded, your prayers are not answered by him, but absorbed by his presence. His presence saves you, wards off the karma, and gives you the boons as the case may be involuntarily. The jnani does save the devotees, but not by sankalpa intention, which is non-existent in him, only through his presiding presence, sanity. And Narayana Iyer's happy response to this was, I was filled with joy. Even today, his presence is the most powerful thing, and that alone, I am confident, saves me. The photo is of Bhagavan sitting on the hill in the Skandashram era. At the end of last month's talk, I summarized the implications of this statement. I will briefly go through the main points again. When you take a request or a desire to a jnani, he doesn't choose how or if to respond to it, nor does he have any desire to intervene in a specific devotee's affairs. Why not? Because the jnani has no desire or intention, no ability to choose how to respond to individual requests. He is not aware of anything outside the self that needs to be changed, improved, or attended to. The jnani simply abides as the self, and through that self-abidance, a presence, a sanity is created. It is this sanity that takes care of the requests and the desires. I gave an example of this in last month's talk. Narayana Iyer's wife, Lalita, silently prayed to Bhagavan for financial assistance to help with some upcoming family wedding. The next day, money came when a man in Gujarat sent a message that Bhagavan had appeared to him in a dream and asked him to send money to Narayana Iyer. Neither Narayana Iyer nor his wife had met him before. They had never even heard of him. The dream Bhagavan even provided the correct postal address to send the money to. On the right, there is a photo of one of Narayana Iyer's daughters getting married in the garden of their family home, which was close to Ramanasaram. I don't know if this was the wedding that the funds came for, since Narayana Iyer and Lalita had more than one daughter. At the top, you can see Narayana Iyer circled in red in a group photo with Bhagavan from the 1930s. A few of his children are sitting in front of him. When Narayana Iyer and his wife went to Bhagavan to thank him, he had no idea that this intervention had happened. He took no responsibility for it. In Bhagavan's continuous self-abidance had brought the sanity into existence, but he had no role in how specifically it dealt with his devotees' requests. As he commented on several occasions, These things happened via what he often termed automatic divine activity and not through a desire on the part of the jnani to help. In the 1990s, I heard Papaji give a very similar explanation of the jnani's sanity and how it worked. This is him on the right holding a satsang in Lucknow, and above is a photo of him putting vibhuti or kumkum on Bhagavan's forehead at a function in his satsang hall. This is how he summarized the process. I have a secretary, he said. I call her Miss Peace. She looks after all my business for me. Like most employees, she only works hard when the boss turns up for work. When I come here in the morning, she sees me coming and springs into action. She inspects the minds of everyone who attends the satsangs and deals with all the desires and requests that are manifesting in the minds of the people who are there. If people come with worldly desires, she can grant them. If they come with a desire for silence, she grants that as well. She can even grant liberation to those who are ready for it. She is very, very powerful. Don't think of her as a junior employee. I myself do nothing, but I've learned from experience that I need to turn up and sit in this chair in order for Miss Peace to work hard at full capacity. He continued, people come here from all over the world. They ask for advice about their life. They quiz me on philosophy. They ask me how to get enlightened. I answer all their questions because people feel that these answers or the personal interactions they have with me are important to them. But the main business, the important work, is all being taken care of by Miss Peace. I just sit here while she attends to it all. So that's Papaji's story completed. The next comments are mine. I think this is a great way of envisioning the sanity. The jnani simply abides as the self, doing nothing and desiring nothing. That continuous self-abidance, though, generates a sanity which then looks after all the spiritual and material desires of the devotees who come to the jnani for help. There is another implication in this explanation. It seems that Miss Peace or the sanity is particularly strong in the physical presence of the jnani. Bhagavan and all the other jnanis will say that the self is everywhere and that it can be accessed wherever one might be. But from a devotee's point of view, the power is always felt more strongly if the jnani is close by. At the end of last month's presentation, I promised that this month I would have a detailed look at Bhagavan's statement that the presence of the Guru has the capacity to reduce a devotee's karma. In some of his replies on free will and predestination, Bhagavan could be quite extreme, saying that every action performed was a part of one's destiny. This is a typical exchange that he had with Devaraja Mridalya, seen here on the bottom right. Mridalya wrote, one summer afternoon I was sitting opposite Bhagavan in the old hall with a fan in my hand and said to him, I can understand that the outstanding events in a man's life, such as his country, nationality, family, career or profession, marriage, death, etc., are all predestined by his karma, but can it be that all the details of his life, down to the minutest, have already been determined? Now, for instance, I put this fan that is in my hand down on the floor here. Can it be that it was already decided that on such and such a day, at such and such an hour, I shall move the fan like this and put it down here? Now, this was Bhagavan's response. Bhagavan replied, certainly. He continued, whatever this body is to do and whatever experiences it is to pass through was already decided when it came into existence. Thereupon, said Mridalya, I naturally exclaimed, what becomes then of man's freedom and responsibility for his actions? That's Devaraja Mridalya again on the right. Bhagavan concluded his explanation in the following way. Bhagavan explained, the only freedom man has is to strive for and acquire the jnana which will enable him not to identify himself with the body. The body will go through the actions rendered inevitable by prarabdha, destiny based on the balance sheet of past lives, and a man is free either to identify himself with the body and be attached to the fruits of its actions, or be detached from it and be a mere witness of its activities. No exemptions are hinted at here. Bhagavan is saying that all actions are fixed in advance. On multiple occasions, Devaraja Mudalya attempted to get Bhagavan to admit that prarabdha was not immutable and that the grace of God or the Guru had the potential to override the ordained script. Here he is describing one such attempt. Another point on which I more than once argued with Bhagavan is the extent to which grace can override prarabdha or destiny. My main line of argument throughout was, and my conviction now as ever before is, that God is all-powerful and that nothing is impossible for him, as was often said by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and also that if one got and could get only what one had worked for and merited, there would be no place at all for grace. Most often, Bhagavan used to keep silent when I indulged in such arguments before him, either by myself or with others, some of whom took my side and others the opposite side. Devaraja Mudalya's argument continues on the next slide. He continued, but from various remarks and observations he made on different occasions, I have come to the conclusion that the following is his attitude in the matter. Quote, of course, nothing is impossible for God, but everything that happens according to the order established by God's will or plan, and exceptions are only few and far between. How many Markandeyas are there even in our Puranas? Some explanation needed here. Markandeya was a Puranic figure who escaped his destined death through his exceptional devotion to Shiva. Mrikanda, Markandeya's father, had prayed to Shiva to get a son. Shiva appeared before him and offered him an option. Do you desire to have a virtuous, wise, and pious son who will only live to be 16, or a dull-witted, evil-natured son who will live for a long time? Mrikanda opted for the short-lived son who turned out to be a child sage. On the day of his appointed death, when Yama, the god of death, came to collect him, Markandeya called out to Shiva for help and embraced the lingam of Shiva that he usually meditated on. Yama threw his rope and lassoed the lingam as well as Markandeya. This angered Shiva, who physically manifested to help Markandeya, and then killed Yama with a single blow of his foot. Shiva then granted Markandeya the boon that he could be 16 forever and thus avoid death. He also restored Yama's life. Bhagavan here was willing to accept that in exceptional circumstances, prarabdha could be circumvented, but in his final line, how many Markandeyas are there even in our Puranas, he is indicating that these exceptions are, to quote him again, few and far between. I want to explore this story a little more. This is what Bhagavan wrote about Markandeya in verse 205 of Guru Vanchikakovai. He concedes there that devotion to Shiva outranks what in the verse is labeled as, quote, unswerving fate, unquote. The verse says, Markandeya fought and conquered death and attained the immortal state through the Shiva puja he performed, thus living beyond the life ordained for him, making unswerving fate air and escaping from inescapable death. Hence, if anyone worshipped Shiva, the killer of Yama, by inquiring with full awareness, then Yama's noose, which has the power to ensnare without exception all jivas, will in these exceptional cases get frayed and cut and be unable to catch them. Bhagavan is saying here that self-inquiry, or as he puts it here, inquiring with full awareness, has the power in some instances to change prarabdha. But again, the implication is that such interventions are great rarities. Bhagavan calls them exceptional cases in this verse. Bhagavan also mentions this story in Ramana Purana. There he wrote, by meditating upon the twin feet of the Lord who knows what is written, he who destroys and reduces to nothing the burden of fate, written upon the heads of the most excellent of his devotees, the brahmachari, Markandeya, overcame, through the intensity of his love for the one who ordained his destiny, the fate that decreed that he should die as it had been ordained. Bhagavan makes it clear in these lines that having intense love for God can change or end prarabdha, something that Devaraja Mudalya was always trying to get him to admit. This, incidentally, is from the portion of the Ramana Puranam that was written by Bhagavan himself, not Muruganar. Murugan is seen seated on the front right of the photo. Devaraja Mudaliar was never happy with Bhagavan's absolutist position on free will, even though Bhagavan had admitted that the apparent preeminence of prarabdha could be overcome in rare and exceptional cases. Here is Devaraja Mudaliar citing a reply from Bhagavan himself, making the claim that it is not just in rare cases that prarabdha can be mitigated or annulled. Mudaliar wrote, "On the other hand, many authoritative books have clearly said, and Bhagavan has quoted them with approval, that one look from a jnani can save us from the effects of all our karmas, past or present, prarabdha included. And Sri Janaki Mata has published in her journal Aru that when she discussed this question once with Bhagavan, herself maintaining that his grace can help one even to overcome prarabdha, he told her, if you have such faith, it will be so." So here we have another exception to the rule of prarabdha that has not been mentioned before. The implication of this paragraph is that if the devotee genuinely and firmly believes that prarabdha can be undone by faith in God, then that belief alone makes it possible. This is another crack in the edifice of karmic inevitability. Janaki Mata, by the way, was a devotee of Bhagavan who was regarded as being a saint in her own right. She had an ashram in Tanjore and frequently visited Bhagavan. Sadhu Om was one of her devotees in the early 1940s before he came to Bhagavan around 1946. He was actually the editor of the journal Arul, which Devaraja Mudaliar refers to in this story. You can see Janaki Mata garlanded in the center of this old photo, and behind her with a shaved head is a very young-looking Sadhu Om. The Tamil sign over their heads indicate that it was taken at a function to celebrate Bhagavan's Jayanti. The photo of her at the bottom comes from an obituary notice in a 1969 issue of the Mountain Path. That was the year she passed away. This particular exception to the rules of prarabdha requires a devotee to have full faith that the Guru has the power to undo scripted destiny. Here is Devaraja Mudaliar again giving an instance of what he interprets to be evidence that this is possible. This is what he wrote. When Sri Jagadisha Sastri, the Sanskrit Pandit in Bhagavan's court, was on his deathbed, he wrote his final appeal in his poems, declaring that he would not accept any plea by Bhagavan that prarabdha must follow its course. He said that if Bhagavan only willed it, his grace could cancel prarabdha and save him. Bhagavan took such compassion on him that he was pulled out of the jaws of death and is now flourishing in Madras. Not only I, but many other close devotees of Bhagavan fully believe that it was only Bhagavan's grace that saved the Sastri from certain death. The photo on the screen is of Jagadisha Sastri and his wife standing on the hill with Bhagavan. Devaraja Mudaliar has been in full lawyer mode over the past few slides, and good for him for pushing Bhagavan on this topic. He elicited some very good replies. He started with a statement from Bhagavan that prarabdha is immutable, and then proceeded to interrogate it by citing Bhagavan himself, introducing evidence of exceptions and loopholes that make the original premise a lot more flexible. The story of Markandeya and the reply that Bhagavan gave to Janaki Mata indicate that prarabdha can be overcome in the right circumstances. After narrating the story of Jagadisha Sastri, which he took to illustrate his contention that full faith in the Guru could overcome one's destined death, Mudaliar went on to cite the example of Rangan, a schoolboy friend of Bhagavan. This story provided additional evidence for Mudaliar that simply being in the sanity, the presence, is enough to counteract and even eliminate prarabdha. This is Rangan in a group photo. He is the man with folded arms second from the right. Two families are arranged around the photo of Bhagavan. Rangan, circled in red, is on the right of the photo. To the left of Bhagavan's photo is the family of Pokiramani, also known as Villachari Mani Iyer. He was also a childhood associate of Bhagavan. He is the other man circled in red. I am guessing the photo dates from the late 1920s. Here is Rangan telling his own story over several slides. According to my horoscope, the year 1921 was destined to be an especially bad period in my life. Bhagavan told me many times that I should not leave him during this period. In saying this, he also seemed to acknowledge that this period would be a potentially troublesome time for me. During this year, while I was staying at Skandashram, a friend of mine came to Bhagavan and asked me to accompany him to Madras. Rangan continues, I had planned to go, but Bhagavan told me, put him on the train and come back here at once. Don't stay at any Chaltry, a guest house for pilgrims in town. Even if it is very late at night, come straight here from the station. I followed his advice, since Bhagavan has clearly spotted some hidden danger. On another occasion, during this same period, I wanted to perform the new moon rites on my father's grave. This is a slight enlargement of the previous photo. Rangan is on the right with his arms folded. He continues, when I told Bhagavan about my desire, he showed me a photo of my father and said, your father is here. You need not travel anywhere else for these ceremonies. On that particular day, Bhagavan refused to give me permission to go anywhere. He was not always so strict. On a few occasions during this period, he would give me permission to go to Madras, but he would always tell me that I should come back as soon as I'd finished my business there. At some point during the year, some of my friends decided to go and work in Singapore. They asked me if I would like to go with them. Because I was afraid of poverty, I agreed. This is a close-up of Rangan taken from the previous group photo. The photo is the only one I know that features Rangan. Rangan concludes his story. When I went to Bhagavan to get his permission, he heard my story and said, all right, we will see, but he would not give me his permission to leave the ashram. After several requests, I finally persuaded him to allow me to go to Madras and join my friends. On my arrival there, I learned that my friends, after seeking me in vain, had left for Singapore without me. By Bhagavan's grace and by his determined physical intervention, I survived the year without experiencing any mishaps. For me, there are two interesting aspects to this story. The first is that Bhagavan himself recognized that Rangan was in some kind of physical danger and took steps to make sure that this destined outcome didn't happen. This is very, very unusual. I can't think of anyone else who was ordered to remain in Bhagavan's presence for a long period in order to avoid a destined calamity. The second is the interesting implication, for me at least, that the full protection from the effects of the prarabdha would only be possible if Rangan stayed close to Bhagavan. Bhagavan did not say, you can go wherever you like, I'm looking after you. He made a point of saying that Rangan had to be in the physical sanity as much as possible in order to circumvent the danger that his prarabdha had in store for him. Bhagavan only allowed him to go back to his old life once he could see that the danger had been averted. At this point in the discussion, I'm going to introduce Lakshmana Swami because he had some interesting things to say about sitting in the presence of a jnani and the effect this might have on one's prarabdha. On the right, there is a photo of him taken in 1951. The one on the left was taken in the mid-70s. Once, while we were sitting with him, he said that when he was out walking, he could see people whose destinies were completely fixed. He said, I never look for this information. It just strikes me occasionally. I can see the futures of some people. Occasionally, I can even see who or what they're going to be in their next life. His conclusion, based on this information that randomly came to him, was that the futures of people who were not meditating or striving for self-realization were fixed, that they were moving along the rails of prarabdha to an unavoidable destination that even continued in their next life. But then he added, quote, I never see this kind of information when I'm sitting with devotees who are here because they want to know the self. For me, the implication of this is that if you are in the presence of a jnani, the constraints of prarabdha are loosened. The future can be changed in the physical sanity of a jnani. I should stress, though, there is no record of Bhagavan saying anything like this, but there is one possible implication of the Rangan story I just read out. The presence of a jnani really does have the power to change physical script for the better. Before I move on, I will add one more story because it is another instance of Bhagavan refusing to let a devotee leave his presence because he seemed to be aware that something bad was about to happen to one of his devotees. The devotee in this story is G.V. Subramaya, a Telugu professor who had had a long and close association with Bhagavan. It was G.V. Subramaya who first introduced Lakshman Swami to Bhagavan when he gave an end-of-term lecture at his Nellore college. Here is Subramaya narrating his experience of Bhagavan detaining him at Ramanashram. That's a photo of him on the right. On the day of my departure from Ramanashram, the most extraordinary thing happened. It was Saturday. I was due to attend college on Monday, so I wanted to start that noon. After packing and arranging my baggage, I went to Sri Bhagavan to prostrate and get permission to leave. On all such previous occasions, Sri Bhagavan would either say yes, go, or give a silent nod of approval. This time, Sri Bhagavan said, "Your college opens on Monday. Why should you go now?" Subramaya continued. I at once replied, "I won't go now, I shall stay," and cancelled my travel arrangements. That whole afternoon he was especially gracious to me and took great pains to teach me the Malayalam alphabet. That evening, as he was starting to go up the hill, I again asked whether I might go by the evening train. He inquired whether it was a through train. No, I replied, it will stop at Katpadi. Subramaya's account continues. In that case, said Bhagavan, why should you spend the night at Katpadi station? Why not be here? I again postponed my journey. The early morning train of the next day was the last possible one for me. At about 5 a.m. I waited for Bhagavan's darshan. As soon as he saw me, he inquired whether I'd finished breakfast. I answered that I had. Are you ready to start? Yes, I replied and prostrated. As I got up and looked at him, I noticed that the look on his face had completely changed. His eyes were wide open, fixed and steady. He seemed to be seeing through me and beyond me into the infinite. I had never had such a gaze from Sri Bhagavan before. I felt like Arjuna in Visvarupa Sandarshan. I was face to face with pure divine majesty. I stood spellbound. 5 minutes, 10 minutes passed. The cartman was pressing. I mumbled the words, I take leave. But there was no response, not the least change in the lustrous long gaze. I came away overwhelmed with awe and fear. Everyone said that the way Sri Bhagavan treated me was unprecedented and that it signified some momentous change for me. The momentous change occurred a few months later. He wrote, within 3 months I discovered what it was. My wife had a sudden serious pre-delivery complication and was admitted to hospital on 23rd December. That very night she delivered a stillborn baby. On the same day, I wired to the ashram reporting her condition and praying for Sri Bhagavan's grace, but to my amazement, I received no reply till 27th December. That evening, I got word that her illness had taken a serious turn. As I was hurrying to the hospital, the following letter from the ashram dated 26th December was put into my hands. Subramaya continued, your card has been received today and it was placed before Sri Bhagavan. The wire was received on the 23rd, and it was also duly placed before Sri Bhagavan. The telegram gave a wrong name at Subramanya, which prevented us from addressing a reply. This is Subramanya continuing. However, before I reached the hospital, it was all over. The body of my wife was still warm when I arrived, and I could not believe she was dead until the doctor, at my request, examined her again and pronounced her life extinct. He continues, till then I was all anxiety, but at that moment I felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my mind. A heavenly peace descended on me, and I became a completely new man. In that moment my mind's eye opened out to the beatific presence of Sri Bhagavan, and I thrilled at the sweet serenity of Sri Bhagavan's gracious look. From then on, my mind became fully conscious of Sri Bhagavan's guidance. Subramanya concludes his account. Of all the frenzied mourners gathered at the time, I can say truthfully that I was the only calm person. I took the lead and arranged everything. I did my best to console the others. I acted like a perfect automaton. My conduct in that crisis was to me the greatest marvel of Sri Bhagavan's grace. I informed Sri Bhagavan what had happened. A colleague of mine was present in the hall when Sri Bhagavan perused my card. He apparently gave it a long, fixed gaze that was similar to the look he had given me in person at my previous departure. This story is a little different from the one that Rangan narrated, since the prarabdha of Subramaya's wife was not changed. Bhagavan was clearly aware in some way that her death was coming soon. In this case, though, he was unable or willing to do anything about it. But he did know that Subramaya would be devastated by the event, so he detained him at Ramanashramam and gave him enough grace to withstand the shock when it finally came. And not just withstand the shock. In a moment when his grief should have been at its maximum, Subramaya wrote, "A heavenly peace descended on me and I became a completely new man. In that moment, my mind's eye opened out to the beatific presence of Sri Bhagavan, and I thrilled at the sweet serenity of Sri Bhagavan's gracious look. From then on, my mind became fully conscious of Sri Bhagavan's guidance." This story adds a little nuance to the general narrative of to what extent the Guru can intervene in the prarabdha of devotees. In this case, the death of Subramaya's wife could not be averted, even though Bhagavan could see it coming, but by detaining Subramaya at Ramanashramam and by giving him a major transmission in the hall, Bhagavan was able to ensure that one of his closest devotees not only weathered the personal storm that was heading his way, he made him do it in such a way that he was filled with joy and peace when the inevitable death happened. I want to go back now to where I started this talk, to the teaching that Bhagavan gave to Narayana Iyer on the effect that the sanity could have on a devotee's karma. This is part of the reply he gave to Narayana Iyer on that occasion. Just as a trouble or arrow that comes to destroy the head goes away carrying with it only the turban, so a person's bad karma will be considerably reduced while he is in the presence of a jnani. This is a widely held belief and one that Bhagavan appears to support in this answer to Narayana Iyer. If your prarabdha includes a major accident, for example, the power of the Guru's presence can occasionally reduce its seriousness. And at this point, I will throw in a personal anecdote about this. On the right, there is a photo of Saudama taken in 1986, and at the top, there is a photo of the two of us taken at Lakshmana Swami's ashram in the mid-80s, around the time this story took place. Saudama told me later that she had had a strong premonition that I was due to have a serious car accident, but she didn't pass on that information to me. Shortly afterwards, I was doing some cleaning in the small temple that is dedicated to Bhagavan, located in the ashram. As I was attempting to unhook a very large and heavy photo of Lakshmana Swami from the wall, the ladder I was on moved away from the wall and I fell heavily, holding onto the photo. Although my feet were only about 2 feet away from the ground when the ladder slid away from me, I ended up fracturing my femur. Once I was settled in the hospital, I sent a copy of the x-ray to a doctor friend of mine in the UK. He wrote back saying, "I think you have sent me the wrong x-ray. I don't think you can get a break like this by only falling 2 feet off the ladder. This is the classic break you get when you're hit in the side by a car traveling at about 60 kilometers per hour. So my destined major car accident happened while I was holding onto a jnani's photo inside a temple dedicated to Sri Ramana. I have no idea what was scheduled in my unmodified prarabdha, but I suspect it would have been a lot more dangerous and life-threatening than what actually happened. I showed Bhagavan's full reply to Narayana Iyer to Papaji when I was staying with him in Lucknow in the mid-1990s. Then I asked him the following question about it. It looks like I was referencing my own experience of the car crash that never happened. On the right, there is a photo of me interviewing him in a government park in Lucknow. The interview was published later in Papaji Interviews, the book at the bottom of the slide. This is the question I asked David. The Maharshi said in one of those answers that sitting in the Guru's presence reduces the effect of bad karma. Many other masters have said the same. For example, one may be destined to be seriously injured in a car crash, but if one is with the Guru at the time the accident is due to happen, one might get away with a minor injury, such as a small cut or a bruise. Do you accept this traditional view? Papaji gave me a long and detailed answer and even wrote it out for me. I had given him a questionnaire that contained many questions about the power of the Guru. Rather than reply to me verbally or address the question in one of his satsangs, which was something he occasionally did when I asked him questions such as these, he chose to sit at his living room table and write out the replies for me. On the right, you can see him writing out his responses to some of the questions I gave him. He was wearing a surgical collar at the time because of neck problems. I think that made it hard for him to see what he was writing. I'm sure it would have been easier to give me a verbal answer, but on this occasion, for some unknown reason, he chose to write it out for me at great length. I have no idea where he got this story from. I never heard him repeat it on any other occasion, and I've never seen it in any book. It's a long story and a long reply, but it is worth giving it in full, and this is how he began. The Guru can change karma completely, not just lessen its effects. The word of the jnani is the final authority in this world or any other. Not even God can overrule him or countermand his orders. There is a Sufi story that makes this point. This photo was taken at the interview I did with him in the Lucknow Park, the one that I featured 2 slides ago. Papaji now starts retelling the Sufi story. Moses used to go up Mount Sinai every year to talk to God. On his way there, he used to pass by the house of a farmer who lived at the foot of the hill. This farmer gave hospitality to travelers, so Moses used to stay with him whenever he passed that way. One year, the farmer asked Moses what business he had in the area. Moses replied, "Every year I come here, I climb to the top of Mount Sinai and talk to God." The farmer said, "We are quite well off here. We have money, we have hundreds of acres to farm, and we have thousands of cattle. The only thing we don't have is a child. I don't know if we are destined to have a child or not, but God must know something like that. I know that everything is destined, so he must know what is due to happen to us in the future. Next time you see God, ask him if we are going to be blessed with a child. If he gives you an answer, you can tell us on the way back." All the remaining slides that tell the story will have photos of Papaji taken either in Lucknow, Rishikesh, or Haridwar. Moses went to the top of Mount Sinai, and during the course of his usual annual conversation with God, he mentioned the farmer's request. God said, "All these things are written down in my ledgers. We have a special department here that keeps all these records. I will show you the relevant book, and you can look up this man's name in it." The ledger of future destinies was produced, and Moses turned to the page that was devoted to the farmer's family. The column in which the names of the children would have been written was blank. In that case, said God, when Moses told him about the entry, "They will not have children." An empty column means no children. Moses thanked God for his help and went back down the mountain to tell the farmer and his wife what he had seen in the Book of Destiny. The farmer resigned himself to his fate. "If this is so," he said, "there is nothing we can do. Thank you for at least finding out the truth for us." A few days later, a saint, an enlightened man, also passed by that house on his way to Mount Sinai. The farmer gave him the usual hospitality. The saint asked about his children, and the farmer replied, "We don't have any, and we are not destined to have any. A man was here a few weeks ago. He looked into God's Book of Destinies and found that we were not going to have any children. We have given up hope." The saint was very happy with the hospitality that the farmer and his wife had extended to him, so he blessed them before he left. The following year, when Moses came on his annual visit, he was surprised to see the farmer's wife holding a small baby. "Whose baby is that?" he asked. "Is someone staying with you?" "No," replied the farmer's wife, "it's mine. I gave birth a few weeks ago." But how could this happen, wondered Moses out loud. I myself saw God's own book of destiny, and he even told me himself that you would not have any children. I don't know how it happened, responded the woman, but I do know that a saint visited us a few days after you did. We didn't tell him what we wanted, but he was happy with our hospitality, and he blessed us before he left. Moses thought to himself, someone is getting careless in God's accounts department. I should tell him about this next time I see him. It's not good to have people making mistakes like this. A few days later, during his annual conversation with God on the summit of Mount Sinai, Moses brought up the subject of the incorrect records. I saw this book myself, said Moses, and the children column was blank. But this same woman gave birth a few weeks ago. Someone in your record-keeping department must have made a mistake. Bring the book, said God to one of his attendants. I should find out what has been happening. The book was brought, and the appropriate page was shown to God. When God and Moses looked at the book together, they saw that a symbol, like the letter U, had been added to the children's page. Ah, this explains it, said God. This U is a picture of an enlightened man's tongue. Some jnani must have blessed this woman and announced that she would have a baby. The word of a jnani is paramount. Whatever he says has to happen, even if these things are not written in the book of destiny. The jnani's tongue is outside my control. It can undo anything that is written in my destiny books. And here is the final installment of the story. This is Papaji's summary conclusion to the long story he just narrated. This is how it is. In the presence of an enlightened man, your desires can be fulfilled, even if you never specifically mention them. The jnani can even undo your destiny. You may be destined for a particular fate, but one word from the jnani can change it. Even sitting in his presence can change your destiny. This is exactly what Lakshmana Swami was saying when he said that he never saw the futures of people who were sitting in his presence. The sanity has the power to change or even eliminate prarabdha. The photo on the screen is of the two of us on a bridge in Haridwar in 1993. Having read everything Bhagavan has said and written on the subject of destiny, prarabdha, I am inclined to agree with this conclusion by Papaji, even though Bhagavan was occasionally quite insistent that prarabdha could not be altered. In his writings and verbal replies, Bhagavan taught that Ishvara issues us with a scripted life of prarabdha and allocates consequences to the actions that we perform with the I am the doer idea. But as Bhagavan and Papaji have made clear, Ishvara is not the ultimate authority here. The Guru's power is such that his word or his presence both have the power to undo the prarabdha that has been issued to us. These interventions may be rare, but the power of prarabdha does not outrank the power of the Guru's sanity. It is now, finally, time to get back to the story of Narayana Iyer. At the end of last month's talk and at the beginning of this one, I read out Bhagavan's reply to Narayana Iyer's question on the power the Guru has to intervene in devotees' lives when they ask for help with their affairs. After reading Bhagavan's response, I then set out on a long digression on sanity and how it has the power to overcome or eliminate karma. This is what comes next in the chapter I compiled about Narayana Iyer. He wrote, Bhagavan is God himself, and in saying this, I do not refer to any of the personal gods of any religion, but to the universal principle or pure consciousness. I dislike comparing him with any past personage, for there is no meaning in comparing incarnations of that one principle which has no second. But yet, for our understanding, if at all we want to compare, it can only be with Christ or Buddha. Narayana Iyer continued, I never forgot whenever I was talking with him or sitting in his presence, but here was God sitting and talking. It is our greatest fortune that the Supreme Consciousness, appearing in the garb of a human body, graciously undertook to come down to our level of understanding and bore the tremendous task of importing to us the truth of Atma-vidya, self-knowledge. Such a thought always made me understand him and his talks better and more clearly. The idea that the Supreme Consciousness took Sri Ramana's form to impart true knowledge is one that Muruganar also espoused. Here he is articulating his own similar sentiments. Muruganar wrote, "In the past, I did not know that which is termed as Supreme Brahman. Now that I have seen and known it, I experience joy. It moves about in the form of a mendicant, supporting itself on a walking stick, looking around for souls to save with the gaze of his lotus eyes." And on the right, we have Bhagavan wandering around Arunachala with that self-same walking stick. This verse originally appeared as number 201 in Muruganar's Sri Ramana Devamalai. Devaraja Mudalya also liked this verse and made his own translation in his memoir, My Recollections of Bhagavan Sri Ramana. Narayana Iyer now starts out on an interesting section in which he explains how he once felt disadvantaged by his lack of scriptural knowledge. Once, some very learned Sanskrit scholars were sitting in the old hall discussing portions of the Upanishads and other scriptural texts with Bhagavan. Bhagavan was giving them proper explanations, and it was a sight to remember and adore. At the same time, I felt genuinely in my heart, oh, how great these people are, and how fortunate they are to be so learned and to have such deep understanding and be able to discuss with our Bhagavan. Compared with them, what am I, a zero in scriptural learning? Narayana Iyer continued, I felt miserable. After the pundits had taken leave, Bhagavan turned to me and said, what? Looking into my eyes and studying my thoughts. Then, without even giving me an opportunity to explain, he continued, this is only the husk. All this book learning and capacity to repeat the scriptures by memory is absolutely no use. To know the truth, you need not undergo all this torture of learning. Not by reading do you get to the truth. Be quiet, that is the truth. Be still, that is God. Narayana Iyer continued. Then, very graciously, he turned to me again, and there was an immediate change in his tone and attitude. He asked me, do you shave yourself? Bewildered by this sudden change, I answered, tremblingly, that I did. Bhagavan explained his point. For shaving, you use a mirror, don't you? You look into the mirror and then shave your face. You don't shave the image in the mirror. Similarly, all the scriptures are meant only to show you the way to realization. They are meant for practice and attainment. Mere book learning and discussions are comparable to a man shaving the image in the mirror. From that day onwards, the sense of inferiority I had been feeling vanished once and for all. This led Narayana Iyer to inquire of Bhagavan about his own spiritual practices. He wrote, one more assurance from Bhagavan that he also gave as a personal instruction is of absolute value for me in my sadhana. I cried to him that I knew nothing about Vedanta, nor could I practice austerity being a householder. So I prayed to him to help me by showing the reality or the way to it. I also frankly admitted that Bhagavan's own method of self-inquiry was too hard for me. This was Bhagavan's advice. He graciously responded, you know Uladu Nakadu, don't you? It imparts pure truth, deals with it, and explains it. Go on reading it verse by verse. The words of the verses will, in course of time, vanish, and pure truth, that alone will shine, like the snake relinquishing its skin and coming out shining. This is now my sadhana. Narayana Iyer's recollection of feeling spiritually inferior when he couldn't understand a discussion on Sanskrit texts in the hall reminds me of a very similar incident that had taken place a few years before. On that occasion, the devotee who couldn't understand what was going on was Sadhu Natanananda. He had been listening to a discussion between Bhagavan, Ganapati Muni, Kapali Sastri, who was one of Ganapati Muni's disciples, and an unnamed group of Sanskrit pandits. That's Ganapati Muni with Bhagavan in the top photo. Kapali Sastri is the man sitting at the desk in the bottom photo. Kapali Sastri was the translator of Saddarshana Bhashya and the editor of the very interesting collection of dialogues with Bhagavan that preceded in the book. This is what Sadhu Natanananda wrote. On one Vyasa Purnima day, that's the festival celebrated on the day of the July or August full moon, Ganapati Muni, Kapali Sastri, along with a group of Sanskrit scholars, were walking around the mountain. They stopped off at the ashram to pay their respects to the Maharshi. When they were seated in the old hall, they started discussing philosophy in Sanskrit. That's Sadhu Natanananda on the right, and this is how his report continued. I was listening to the discussion, and I knew that they were discussing philosophy, but I could not follow the meaning. Because of this, my mind began to wander, and I became quite agitated, wondering when the day would dawn when I would have the experiences that they were talking about. My longing for these experiences was so intense that I lost all consciousness of the body. I was not sure how long I remained in that state, but suddenly a voice brought back my normal consciousness. Here is another photo of Sadhu Natanananda sitting in his garden, and this is how he continued with his account. All the others had left, and only Bhagavan remained in the hall. Why are you so dejected, said the voice. If you are really unfit to realize the self in this life, then you would not have come to this place at all. All the power that drew you here will make you realize the self. If not today, it is bound to fulfill its commitment. There is no reason why you should feel dejected. It was these gracious words that brought me back to life, and peace entered my soul immediately. This was an extraordinary promise that Bhagavan made to Natanananda, that he would not be sitting in front of Bhagavan if he was unfit to realize the self in his current life. I can't recollect Bhagavan making this statement and this promise to any other devotee. And did it happen as Bhagavan predicted? You can judge for yourselves as I read out these verses that Sadhu Natanananda composed many years later. Dr. Venkata Subramaniam found them in a notebook that Natanananda had donated to Sri Ramanashramam. They come from a poem entitled Tiruvarup Selvam, meaning the wealth of grace. Since we were translating Natanananda's Tamil book, Sri Ramana Darshanam at the time, we included them in the English edition that was subsequently published by Sri Ramanashramam. Many of the verses in the poems summarize Bhagavan's teachings, but the ones I'm putting on the screen speak of his own experience of the self. Going through them, I get the feeling that Bhagavan's promise of realization in this life was fulfilled. This is what the verses say. By getting rid of oppressive attachments, I died. What is now animating the body is being consciousness, that which abides as my Lord. Losing self-awareness, I was chained in the body by the vile senses. I was liberated by the consciousness that manifested in my heart as the soul of my soul. As desires ceased through the blessings of my master, the mind, which was never previously satisfied, now attained fullness and completeness. Here are three more. Having succeeded in getting the good fortune of practicing devotion to the feet of the Lord in whom grace is abounding, the soul which was merged in dark delusion attained the heart state. To my eye of jnana, which has seen the truth, the self appears everywhere. The illusory object perceived by the senses, which I saw when I was deluded, no longer appear. When the glittering sun appears, no stars are seen. Similarly, when my godliness arose, no thought appeared. And here are the final three verses. There is a chapter on Sadhu Natanananda in part 1 of The Power of Presence. These verses are included there. When the expanded edition of the book comes out, I will add more verses from those previously unpublished poems. Jnana did not shine as long as the ego manifested. When the self appeared, ego disappeared by itself. By thinking without thought of the one, Bhagavan, who like Arunachala abides without movement, I sank into the heart. Appearing as the Guru outside and as consciousness within, he weeded out the illusory mind and revealed my real nature. Here is a nice old clip of Sadhu Natanananda speaking in his garden that comes from a French documentary entitled Ashrams that was made by Arnaud Desjardins in 1959. It features clips of famous gurus of that era, such as Anandamayi Ma, Swami Shivananda, Swami Ramdas, Mother Krishnabai, and several others. It also includes, in one edition of the film, a segment on Ramanashramam. The speech by Sadhu Natanananda comes from that section of the film. Unfortunately, a lot of what he said in Tamil was dubbed over by a French voiceover. Let's play it.
Un des innombrables lieux de retraite de l'Inde où quelques disciples se rassemblent autour d'un maître spirituel, un gourou. Celui-ci s'appelait Sri Ramana Maharshi. Il est mort il y a quelques années. Ce vieillard était son premier disciple. Il nous a livré en langue tamile quelques aperçus de la pensée du maître.
Everyone has to understand his real being, truth of his being. That's the crux of his teaching.
ஆனால் பெரும்பான்மையோர் தன்னுடைய உண்மை தான் அல்லாத உடல் முதலிய பற்றித்தான் தானாக நினைத்துக் கொண்டு இருக்கிறார்கள்.
Majority of his devotees think
Le peu que j'ai compris de la traduction anglaise m'a paru à la fois simple et obscur. Chacun de nous doit comprendre son être, la vérité de son être. Nous devons arriver à la séparation du soi et du corps pour parvenir au soi.
அதனாக தன்னுடைய யதார்த்த உண்மை தெரிந்து கொள்வது ஒன்றுதான்.
Le grand enseignement du maître, ce vers quoi les disciples doivent tendre avant tout, c'est à la connaissance suprême du soi.
teaching in the real sense, to know his own self.
அதற்கு அடிப்படையாகத்தான் எல்லோருக்கும் அமை நான் யார் என்று பார் என்ற உபதேசத்தை அவர் சொன்னார்.
That's why Bhagavan
The on-screen claim that Sadhu Natanananda was Bhagavan's first disciple is clearly wrong. Natanananda first met Bhagavan in 1917 when Bhagavan was living at Skamashram. After that detour into the promise that Bhagavan made to Sadhu Natanananda, I'm going to make an even longer detour into a different topic that also features Natanananda. It concerns devotees who asked Bhagavan to initiate them into sannyasa. It is a very distinguished group of devotees who were all in their own way spiritually mature, but Bhagavan said no to all their requests. First, though, here is a comment by Bhagavan that was recorded by Arthur Osborne. I included it in last month's talk on Narayana Iyer. It was written there, "It was he, Narayana Iyer, who asked for a clarification of the state of a family man who follows the path of jnana, and to whom Bhagavan said, remaining as a family man, you can certainly engage in spiritual practice. Even better than the man who thinks, I have renounced everything, is the one who does his duty, but does not think, I do this or I am the doer. A sannyasi who thinks, I am a sannyasi, cannot be a true sannyasi, whereas a householder who does not think I am a householder is truly a sannyasi." This was Bhagavan's standard advice to everyone who consulted him about taking sannyasa. There is not a single recorded instance of Bhagavan either initiating anyone into sannyasa or even approving requests by devotees who wanted to go elsewhere for the required initiation. This is what happened when Sadhu Natanananda tried. The words on the screen are taken from the introduction to Sadhu Natanananda that appears in the chapter about him in The Power of the Present, Part 1. This introduction is an amalgamation of two accounts, Arthur Osborne's Ramana Maharshi and The Path of Self-Knowledge, and Kanchi Swami's Anadu Ninai Bugal. Sadhu Natanananda's original name was Nateshi Mudaliar, and before he came to Bhagavan, he was a school teacher. This is what the account said. Mudaliar Natanananda was one of those whose eagerness and desire to make every effort drove them to the idea of becoming a sannyasin. As in other cases, Sri Bhagavan discouraged us. Just as you avoid the cares of home life while you are here, go home and try to be equally unconcerned and unaffected there. Mudaliar still lacks the full reliance and conviction of a disciple towards his guru, and he made the renunciation despite Bhagavan's clear injunction. He found, as Bhagavan had predicted, that the difficulties on his path grew greater, not less. After some time, he returned to his family and took up work again. That's Natanananda at the bottom next to a cover of Part 1 of The Power of Presence. I spoke to Kanji Swami about this around 1990. This is how I recorded his comments in a footnote I added to the Natanananda story that appears in The Power of the Presence. There I wrote, according to Kanji Swami, personal conversation, Natanananda asked Bhagavan to give him the orange robes of a sannyasa. Natanananda had brought the cloth to Bhagavan's hall, but Bhagavan refused to touch it. Natanananda then put the cloth on the stool in front of Bhagavan that visitors put their offerings on. After a few minutes, he took it away and began to wear it. A few months later, when Natanananda decided to give up his life as a sannyasin, he presented the orange robes to Bhagavan. For the rest of his life, he only ever wore white clothes. That's Kanji Swami standing on the right of the photo. I spoke to Dorab Framji about Sadhu Natanananda's household period, and he surprised me by saying that for many years, Natanananda fulfilled his family obligations by managing a rice mill. I find it hard to envisage him in that role. Dorab gave him a room in his compound when he retired and came to live in Tirunamala again, and he allowed him to be buried in its garden when he passed away in 1981. Dorab showed me where it was, an unmarked grave under a parijata tree. Every morning, an abundance of small orange and white flowers would drop from the tree, making a little repeated everyday floral carpet on his grave. It was very nice to see. Kanji Swami also tried to get Bhagavan to give him sannyasa and was turned down. Undeterred, he went to the Himalayas and found a teacher there who was willing to give him the requisite initiation. He returned to Ramanaswaram and announced to Bhagavan that he had a new Swami name. I can't remember what it was, but it didn't stick because it was a very long, complicated one. Swami something Anandagiri is what I remember. Bhagavan laughed and said, "That's far too big a name. I'm going to carry on calling you Kanji Swami." Bhagavan refused to acknowledge either his new sannyasa state or the name that went with it. On the main photo on the right, Kanji Swami is standing with his arms folded behind Bhagavan, and on the top group photo, he is standing on the top right. The next featured devotee on this list is Maurice Friedman. In the top photo, he is feeding monkeys at Ramanaswaram. In the group photo with Bhagavan, he is circled in red. This group photo is dated 1934 and is probably the earliest recorded photo of him at Ramanaswaram. When Bhagavan turned down Maurice's request to be given sannyasa, he went to Kerala and received the necessary initiation from Swami Ramdas. He wore the orange robes for a while, calling himself Bharatananda, meaning the bliss of India. However, he said that he eventually found the robes to be an impediment and gave them up. When he later in the 1960s worked with the Tibetan community in North India, one of the Dalai Lama's senior lamas told him that he could see that he had been a Buddhist monk in a previous life and that he had retained his desire to wear orange from that particular lifetime. During his visit to Swami Ramdas to get the initiation he required, Ramdas made the comment that appears on the screen. It was published in Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, Talk 179, and it dates from 1936. This is what it says. Mr. Friedman had asked Swami Ramdas something, to which he replied that there will be no more births for himself. Since the grammar of this sentence is ambiguous and could be indicating a last birth for either Ramdas or Friedman, in the 1980s I asked Ganeshan about it. He said that it definitely referred to Friedman's final birth because he returned from Kerala in 1936, telling everyone at Ramanaswaram that he'd been promised that he was in his final birth. The people at Ramanaswaram said Ganesh made fun of him because in those days they tended to see him as a Western businessman who periodically showed up at the ashram in a suit and tie. That's how he appears in the photo with Bhagavan on the top right. Maurice ran an electrical engineering factory in Bangalore on behalf of the Diwan of Mysore state. After his initiation, he carried on working there but showed up for work in his orange robes. He took his sannyasa seriously and even went out begging for his food in the evening. He only put his suit on if important visitors were scheduled to visit the factory. Morris spent decades as an industrious karma yogi, helping with Gandhian-inspired projects all over India. In the 1960s, he devoted a lot of his energies to helping the recently arrived Tibetan refugees in India. And in the early 1970s, he discovered Nisargadatta Maharaj and went on to compile the modern spiritual classic, I Am That. Ramdas's prophecy was eventually fulfilled, and Nisargadatta declared him to be fully liberated. That's Friedman speaking in the top photo. Nisargadatta is seated at the table second from the right. I am developing a particular theme here. The devotees whom Bhagavan refused to initiate were not turned down because they were spiritually immature. Decades after having his initiation request turned down by Bhagavan, Sadhu Natanananda wrote Tamil verses proclaiming his liberation. In between, he had lived as a householder, taking care of his family. And Friedman, after being turned down by Bhagavan, spent decades engaging energetically in social uplift projects before he too was declared enlightened by Nisargadatta. I can add another devotee to this select list, Papaji, seen here in two 1940s photos. The top photo is from 1942, a couple of years before he arrived at Ramanaswaram, while the right side one dates from the late 1940s. Bhagavan had sent him away from Ramanaswaram in 1947 with orders to take his family out of Western Punjab since it would not have been safe for them to remain in Pakistan. Papaji had asked Bhagavan to initiate him into sannyasa around 1944, and like everyone else who had asked the same question, he was turned down. Papaji had been the primary earner in his family throughout the 1930s and 40s, and in the 50s and 60s he worked in mining camps in Karnataka and Goa, supervising all the above-ground logistics for the mining companies he was employed by. Again, here is a highly mature devotee whose request to be initiated into sannyasa was turned down. Papaji was so ready when he met Bhagavan, he got the full and permanent realization of the self within a few months of meeting Bhagavan in 1944. But Bhagavan did not allow him to use that as a pretext for abandoning his family and his worldly responsibilities. The final big-name devotee I'm going to cite here is Muruganar, seen here sitting at the bottom right of a group photo taken at Ramanaswaram. He also asked Bhagavan to give him sannyasa, and he too, like everyone else, was turned down. Muruganar's case is a little different. He did give up his family life and lived the life of a sannyasi, but without ever receiving initiation from Bhagavan. Early on in his association with Bhagavan, he sold all his belongings, donated the proceeds to Ramanaswaram, and for the rest of his life, lived off begged food. When he finally moved into Ramanaswaram in his final years, he said, "You're not going to turn me into a householder." He would turn up at the ashram dining room and beg at the kitchen door for food. Then he took the offered food back to his room and ate it there. He didn't even use a begging bowl when he did this. He would collect the food in a cloth, which I imagine would have leaked as he took its contents back to his room. Bhagavan's blanket refusal to give sannyasa even to highly mature devotees was very unusual for his era. There was a widespread belief that giving up one's family affairs in order to pursue spiritual practices was not just beneficial, it was regarded by many teachers as being essential if one wanted to succeed. Bhagavan was very much going against the grain when he persistently refused to give devotees sannyasa or even permit them to leave their family roles in order to devote more time to spiritual pursuits. Once when Annamalai Swami, seen here in the top left of the slide, told him he had a desire to go live in a cave on Arunachala and meditate there, Bhagavan advised him not to do it, saying, "That will just create a desire to live in a cave, and you will then have to be reborn to fulfill it." For Bhagavan, the traditional accoutrements of tapas were just a trap. Liberation, he said, comes from eliminating the I thought, not from adopting a sadhu-like lifestyle. Maurice Friedman's attachment to his orange robes in a previous life, according to the Dalai Lama's psychic lamas, might well have propelled him to an unwise decision to take sannyasa in his final birth. I'm going to revert to Papaji one more time in this discussion. On the right, there's a photo of him taken near Rishikesh in 1972. On the left, there is a group photo of him walking in the same area in 1969. Papaji went to the Himalayas almost every year, but he was not impressed with the spiritual state of the people who had dropped out of family life to live there. He told me once, quote, one of my mottos is show me the results. If people come to me saying that they are following some great practice or method, I will say, show me the results. How many people have got enlightened doing this? How many people can you point to? Physical renunciation is one of the things that is always recommended, he continued, but I have never seen positive results from it. I have traveled all over the Himalayas and seen thousands of sadhus and sannyasis who gave up their family lives to seek liberation in caves or ashrams. I have yet to come across any who succeeded, which is why I don't recommend it to people who come to see me. If I could see that it was producing results, I would be more than happy to advocate it. But since I am not seeing these results, I won't advise this course of action. And he concluded, I travel all over India, meeting householders in their own homes. In my opinion, the people who are following their spiritual life at home, looking after their families and working to support them, are in a far better spiritual state than most of the sadhus I have met in the Himalayas. I'm going to conclude this section on renunciation and sannyasa in Bhagavan's teachings by going back to the story of Rangan. I mentioned him earlier in my talk today. He was the devotee whom Bhagavan kept close to him for most of a year because he could sense that his prarabdha had some unpleasant events in store for him. Several months of immersion in Bhagavan's physical presence headed off the dangers that were due to come to him. This is a separate incident that took place at Skandashram. That's Bhagavan sitting with his mother at Skandashram on the right. Rangan's photo is below it. In his report, Rangan said, when I started to visit Bhagavan regularly at Skandashram, it occurred to me that it would be good if I became a sannyasin, mendicant monk. I knew that this was a foolish and irresponsible dream because it would leave my family already in a precarious financial position with no one to support them. However, the thought would not leave me. Rangan was unemployed at the time and had a wife and children who needed to be cared for. Even to contemplate this was highly irresponsible. Bhagavan promised to take care of him financially, a promise that resulted in a job in a company that manufactured buses. The commissions he earned from selling these buses provided the money he needed to marry off 2 of his daughters. Rangan continues with his story. One night, while I was lying in my bed at Skandashram, I was unable to sleep because this thought of taking sannyasa kept recurring so strongly. As I was turning uneasily in my bed, Bhagavan came to my side and asked me, what is the matter? Are you in pain? Venkataraman, Bhagavan's childhood name, I replied, I want to adopt sannyasa. That's a photo of Bhagavan sitting on the front wall of Skandashram. Rangan continues, Bhagavan went away and came back with a copy of Bhakti Vijayam, an anthology of the lives of some famous saints who lived in Western India many centuries ago. He opened the book and read out the story in which Saint Vithoba decided to take sannyasa. In the story, his son Jnanadeva, who is an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, gave him the following advice. Wherever you are, whether in worldly society or the forest, the same mind is always with you. It is the same old mind wherever you reside. The photo shows Bhagavan sitting next to a dog at the entrance to Skandashram. This is a group photo taken in the kitchen courtyard of Skandashram. Rangan concludes his account in the following way. After reading this out, Bhagavan added, you can attain jnana even while you are living in samsara, worldly activities. Then why did you become a sannyasin? I countered. That was my prarabdha destiny, replied Bhagavan. Life in the family is difficult and painful, no doubt, but it is easier to become a jnani while living as a householder. This is the only instance I know of Bhagavan stating that liberation is easier for a householder than a sannyasin, but it is a reasonable inference to make from all the comments he made about sannyasa and all the times he refused to allow anyone to abandon their homes and responsibilities in favor of solitary spiritual endeavors. Last month, I promised that I would complete my presentation of the unpublished Narayana Iyer chapter in this month's talk. Unfortunately, with all the extra material, I added on the power of the Guru's presence to mitigate or eliminate prarabdha and the lengthy digressions into the value of book learning and taking sannyasa. I am nowhere near completing new material on Narayana Iyer. I will take it up again next month in my talk then, but this time I'm not going to promise that I will finish it in one talk. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to continuing the story next month.